My husband had been buried less than 2 hours when my mother-in-law leaned close and whispered, "That house belongs to my family now." I was still holding the folded flag. The cemetery at Arlington had been quiet except for the wind moving through the trees. Colonel Robert Cole, retired Army, my husband of 21 years, had been laid to rest with more dignity than most people get in a lifetime. The honor guard folded the flag so carefully it looked sacred. A young soldier handed it to me with both hands, his voice cracking a little. "On behalf of a grateful nation." I nodded because that was all I could do. Robert would have hated a scene. He cleaned his coffee mug before bed, shined his shoes even after retirement, and believed you could tell a lot about a person by how they treated waitresses and janitors. So when Vivian Cole stepped beside me near the funeral car, wearing pearls and no tears, I didn't turn away. She looked at the flag in my arms like it was a receipt. "Diane," she said softly, "we need to be practical now." I thought she meant casseroles, bills, arrangements. Then she leaned closer. "That house belongs to my family now. So does the business." Robert would have wanted his bloodline protected. Behind her, Robert's army friends stood talking quietly. Nobody heard Vivian but me. I could have reminded her I was Robert's wife, not a guest in his life. Instead, I adjusted my grip on the flag and said, "Not today, Vivian." She smiled like I'd just confirmed I was weak. That evening the house felt too large. Robert's reading glasses were still beside his recliner, his half-finished crossword on the kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to pour out. At 7:15, my attorney David Shaw came by with a leather folder and a worried look. "Diane," he said, sitting across from me, "Vivian has already contacted probate counsel." I let out one dry laugh. "Of course she has." David opened the folder. "You have every right to fight this. The house, Cole Precision, the estate accounts. None of this is simple, but you're not powerless." I looked at Robert's chair. Then I said the words that made David blink twice. "Let her have it." He didn't say anything for several seconds. Finally he rubbed his forehead. "Diane, grief makes people do strange things. If you need more time, we can wait. I've already made one decision. You want to surrender everything." "I didn't say surrender." "Then what are you saying?" I looked toward the family room where Robert's recliner still faced the muted television. "I'm saying I don't want to fight the way Vivian wants me to." David slowly closed the folder. "I've handled probate cases for 24 years. I've never seen someone this calm after losing a husband and facing a family lawsuit in the same week." "I don't feel calm." That was the truth. The moment he left, I stood in Robert's closet with one of his old army jackets pressed against my face and cried until my knees hurt on the hardwood floor. There was nothing strategic about those tears. I simply missed my husband. The following Sunday I went to church alone for the first time in over 2 decades. People meant well. Mrs. Collins hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Then came the whispers. I heard Vivian already hired a lawyer. Is she really taking the company? Is Diane just letting her have the house? Small-town gossip travels fast even in Northern Virginia. I smiled politely and kept walking. After the service, Robert's oldest army friend, Gary Mason, caught up with me in the parking lot. He'd served with Robert for nearly 18 years, built like an old oak tree, still wearing his veteran cap everywhere. "Diane, you going to tell me what's going on?" I wish I knew. Robert would have fought. I smiled a little. No. He would have prepared. Gary stood quietly, then nodded once. "I suppose you're right." Meanwhile, Vivian wasted no time. 3 days later she invited half the Cole family to lunch, and by dinner everyone had heard her version. "Diane knows she can't win. My son built that business, it belongs with his family." Apparently, after 21 years of marriage, I no longer counted as family. One afternoon my neighbor Carol brought over a peach cobbler and set it on the counter. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," she said gently. "But are you okay?" "No." She squeezed my hand. "I didn't think so." Sometimes silence is kinder than advice. A week later David called. "The first probate conference is next Tuesday. If you're still planning to let Vivian take everything, I need to know before we walk into that courtroom." I glanced toward Robert's workshop. His old toolbox still sat exactly where he'd left it. "I haven't changed my mind." David sighed. "I hope your husband left you something more than courage." After I hung up, I whispered to the empty kitchen. "So do I." I wasn't nearly as certain as everyone believed. Every night I lay awake wondering whether I was honoring Robert's memory or making the biggest mistake of my life. One Monday, David drove me to Cole Precision Manufacturing in Alexandria. Robert had asked me to stay involved after he retired from the army, mostly handling payroll while he ran the shop. We didn't build anything glamorous. We repaired precision hydraulic systems for fire departments, rescue teams, and federal contractors. Robert always said there was more honor in fixing equipment that saved lives than in making headlines. Tom Riley, the production manager, hurried over. "Mrs. Cole, we've all been wondering, is it true? Vivian says she's taking over." Several employees stopped pretending to work, listening. "The probate case is still ongoing," I said. Tom hesitated. "Are our jobs safe?" That question hit harder than anything Vivian had said. These weren't just employees. Many had been with Robert 20 years or more, veterans, people whose mortgages and kids' tuition depended on this place. "I honestly don't know yet," I admitted. It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was the only honest one. When I got home that day, Vivian's SUV was parked across the street. She wasn't alone. A real estate agent stood beside her, pointing at my house, measuring my driveway, my flower beds, the vegetable garden Robert had built by hand after retiring. My neighbor Carol knocked a few minutes later. "You saw them?" "I did." She was telling the realtor she'd remodel the kitchen before Christmas. She planned this fast. Instead, every evening after dinner, I sat at his old workbench. "So why aren't you stopping her, but to organize?" I looked toward Robert's military workshop, journals, because that's what everyone expects me legal to do. Envelopes. Robert labeled everything. It was an army habit. I wasn't searching for anything specific. I just wanted to understand the life we'd built together. Then one Thursday evening, something slipped from an old green binder onto the floor. A sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. The next morning, Tom and 2 other longtime employees showed up at my door with donuts, just to check on me. "Over coffee," Tom finally said. "Vivian visited the factory yesterday. Introduced herself as the future owner. Asked for a list of employees over 60. The table went quiet. One of the machinists, Ed, said, "She said younger workers are cheaper." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Tom looked at me. "Colonel Cole would never have treated people like that." "No," I said softly. "He wouldn't." Patted my hand. "We don't care who owns the company. We care who leads it." That evening I carried the green binder back to the dining table, the sealed envelope still inside. I traced my fingers over Robert's handwriting. "Diane, open this when the time feels right." I took a breath and broke the seal. Robert had never been one for long speeches, so seeing 3 full pages in his hand made my chest tighten. "My darling Diane, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And knowing my mother, she's probably already making your life harder than it needs to be." I laughed out loud in the empty house. He wrote about ordinary things first, the furnace filter, his old truck. Then his handwriting turned serious. "You know me well enough to understand I never walked into an operation without an exit plan. Business isn't much different. Michael, David, in the letter he used my attorney's old name, Michael, knows where the important papers are. If something ever feels wrong, ask him to check the blue estate binder. Not the green one." He frowned. "A blue binder." I found it on the bottom shelf of the workshop, covered in dust, and carried it to the workbench. Inside were trust documents, corporate records, and legal correspondence dating back almost 8 years, with a yellow sticky note on one page. "David, review every 5 years." Called him immediately. 20 minutes later he sat at my dining table, turning pages in silence. His expression shifted. Confusion, disbelief. Finally he stopped. "Diane, Robert didn't hide anything. He documented everything exactly the way he was supposed to." "What does that mean?" He tapped the binder. "It means Cole Precision may not belong to Robert's probate estate." And blinked. "What? And if I'm reading this correctly, neither does your house." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Outside, a school bus rolled past. I finally found my voice. "So Vivian may have spent the last month fighting over property that isn't even part of the estate." David nodded slowly. "I need to verify every document. But if these records are valid, the final hearing is going to unfold very differently than anyone expects. The final probate hearing was scheduled for a chilly Tuesday morning at the Fairfax County Courthouse. I barely slept the night before, not from fear of Vivian but from fear of hope. David called the evening before. I verified every document. They're legitimate. You're being awfully mysterious. He chuckled. I learned from your husband. The hallway outside the courtroom was crowded. Neighbors, veterans from Robert's American Legion post, Tom and half a dozen employees who'd taken the morning off. Vivian arrived dressed like she was attending an awards banquet, a smile that had grown wider every week since the funeral. Her attorney, Peter Lang, arranged neat stacks of folders on the table. I hope there are no hard feelings, Diane, she said. There should have been fewer hard words, I answered. This is simply business. It stopped being business the day we buried your son. Judge Nancy Price entered promptly at 9. Peter Lang presented Vivian's claims with polished confidence. Family legacy, bloodline, generational ownership. Then David stood. His opening statement lasted less than 2 minutes. We have no objection to the petition as it relates to assets legally belonging to the probate estate. Confused looks moved through the gallery. Document after document was placed before me. I signed each one. David slid across the table. Vivian leaned back, comfortable, believing she'd already won. When the last page reached me, David asked quietly, You don't have any questions? I trust my husband. Sign. A murmur spread through the gallery. She gave up. Judge Price gathered the signed documents and read silently for nearly a minute. Then, instead of announcing a ruling, she closed the file, removed her glasses, and looked directly at Peter Lang. Counselor, before this court enters a final order, I need clarification. The room went completely still. Did you verify whether every asset listed in your petition is actually part of Colonel Cole's probate estate? Yes, Your Honor. She opened a smaller folder beneath the court file. Are you certain? For the first time all morning, Peter Lang looked uncertain. He glanced at Vivian, who nodded confidently. Yes, Your Honor. Interesting, the judge said. Mr. Lang, were you aware that Cole Precision Manufacturing was transferred into the Cole Legacy Trust over 7 years ago? Silence. He flipped frantically through his binders. Nothing. And were you also aware that the residence on Maple Ridge Drive was conveyed into the same trust during that transaction? My heart pounded. Your Honor, those documents were never presented during discovery, Peter said. David stood. They were recorded with Fairfax County in 2018. He handed a certified copy to the clerk. The judge compared it to her own papers and nodded. They match. A murmur rolled through the courtroom. Vivian grabbed her attorney's arm. What is this? I don't know. You said everything was part of the estate. That's what the petition indicated. The judge asked. Counselor, did you independently verify title before asking this court to distribute these assets? I relied on the information provided by my client. I see. She looked toward Vivian. Mrs. Cole, this court cannot distribute property that is not legally owned by the estate. Quiet murmurs filled the room. Vivian's confident smile disappeared. Tom whispered. For the first. I didn't know either, I said. David continued. The trust requires unanimous approval from all 3 trustees before the business can be sold, dissolved, or relocated. So Mrs. Cole can't simply sell the company? Peter asked. No one can, David said. Not without meeting the conditions Colonel Cole established. The company must continue operating in Northern Virginia, maintain a veteran hiring program, and retain no fewer than 80% of its full-time employees during any ownership transition. Ed let out a breath so loud several people laughed. So, the judge said, Colonel Cole intended to protect both the business and the people working there. Exactly, Your Honor. Vivian leaned toward her attorney. There has to be something. The trust appears valid. Appears. I need you to be certain. The judge looked at Vivian. Mrs. Cole, regardless of how you feel about these arrangements, this court cannot disregard legally executed trust documents. My son would never cut me out, Vivian said, shaking her head. David answered gently. He didn't. The trust provides Mrs. Vivian Cole with a one-time distribution of $50,000. Vivian blinked. $50,000. Colonel Cole also wrote a personal letter explaining why. He handed it to the clerk. The judge read it silently, then folded it carefully. I won't read this aloud. It was clearly a private message. But I'll say this. Colonel Cole devoted considerable thought to ensuring his family, his employees, and his community were all cared for after his death. She signed several orders before closing the file. The claims seeking ownership of Cole Precision Manufacturing and the residence on Maple Ridge Drive are denied. Those assets are not part of the probate estate. Her gavel struck once. Nobody rushed for the exit. Vivian remained seated, staring at the table, not crying, just still. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. One asked me how I felt. Relieved, I said honestly. Do you consider today a victory? I looked toward Tom and the others waiting in the parking lot. I think my husband would be happy. And your mother-in-law? I truly hope she finds peace. The following Monday, I visited Cole Precision for the first time since the hearing. The shop felt alive again. Machines humming, someone brewing coffee. Ed handed me a box found in Robert's office. Dozens of handwritten thank you notes he'd written over the years. One envelope, never mailed, was addressed simply, to whoever leads this company after me. Inside one sentence. Take care of the people and the business will take care of itself. That sounds exactly like him, I said. Tom laughed. That's because nobody ever won an argument with the colonel. Winter arrived quietly. By December, the maple tree in the yard had dropped its last leaf. There were still insurance forms, accountants, more trust paperwork than I imagined possible. Every Tuesday, Tom and I met in Robert's old office to review reports. I wasn't replacing him. I was protecting what he'd built. By spring, we'd welcomed 3 new veteran apprentices into the shop. A few weeks before Memorial Day, I received an unexpected letter. The return address belonged to Vivian. Inside was a single sheet, no lawyer, no demands. Diane, I spent so much time trying to hold on to what Robert owned that I forgot to appreciate who he was. I can't change what happened. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. No request for forgiveness. Just those few sentences. I folded it and placed it inside the same blue binder that had changed everything. Some apologies don't erase the past, but they can keep bitterness from following you into the future. On Memorial Day morning, I drove to Arlington carrying fresh white roses. I found Robert's grave without looking at the map. I always could. I knelt, brushed a few leaves from the base of the stone, and set the flowers beside it. I finally understand, I said quietly. You weren't protecting the money. You were protecting the people. That had always been Robert's mission. The house was never just a house. The company was never just a business. They were places where lives had been built and families had found stability. His greatest legacy wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the people still standing because he'd cared enough to plan ahead. Walking back to the car, I realized I no longer wanted revenge. Justice had already done its work. What remained was peace. And after everything that had happened, peace felt like the greatest inheritance of all.